go forward with the first panel. Now, as you can see from looking at the agenda for this conference, we're trying to deal in this conference with what the key trends today, this year, are in immigration, and that's why we began with a view from the states, since that is such a prominent aspect of what's taking place in immigration today. But we're going to switch now to the national level, because another dimension of what's taking place in immigration today, of course, is that this is an election year, and it is an extraordinary election year. Among the things that is distinctive about this year as an election year is that immigration is very much in the air as an election issue. And so the theme for this panel now for the next hour and 5 minutes is immigration and the 2008 elections. We've a very qualified panel to speak this morning about different aspects of immigration as an election year issue. Our first speaker is going to be Brian Nienaber, who is Vice President of the Tarrance Group, which is a Republican survey research and political strategy organization. Brian came to this position from having served in the Congress as a staff person for Senator DeWine. Arturo Vargas is going to be next, and Arturo is somebody that I think is probably well known to many in the audience, Executive Director of the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, NALEO, who has for many, many years been in the trenches where naturalization and voter registration in particular are concerned. And then, of course, Frank Sharry, who is in a new role as the Executive Director of a new organization, America's Voice, which you'll hear about this morning, but is, of course, well known to this community as the Executive Director for many, many years of the National Immigration Forum. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists a question as a way of getting the discussion going, and they'll make their remarks, and then we'll have time after they've made their remarks for Q&A from the audience. We're going to start with Brian Nienaber, and the question that I'd like to pose to Brian as a way of kicking off this exchange is the following. The failure of immigration legislation almost a year ago, in the spring of 2007, of course, made it seem as if immigration was a top-tier issue that would then jump immediately into the elections because of the inability to do anything about it politically in the Congress. And yet we have 3 candidates remaining in the race, and they are all candidates who voted yes for the Senate bills in 2006 and in 2007. There's very little difference in their positions on immigration. So the question is, what role has immigration played so far in the election race, and what role can we expect it to play as we go forward into the general election? Brian?
Okay, thank you. Come up here. Yes. Okay, thank you. What an excellent question to kick off. Thank you so much. And Thank you. I want to really appreciate very much having all of you here today as a practicing Catholic who thinks that there ought to be a more reasonable solution to immigration. Your work here is very close to my heart, and I appreciate very much your generosity in asking me to be here today. In answering that, I think part of what we have not seen, in 2006, I think Republicans made a strategic decision that they were going to use sort of anti-immigration fervor as a mechanism to run against Democratic candidates, and certainly using amnesty as a significant charge. And really, we in 2006, we as a party in one of our worst elections I think we've had since the Watergate days. So I think to that extent, an awful lot of people I think figured this was just not all that valuable of an issue to work on. But then at the same time, you sort of had this dichotomy of when you looked at how the Republican candidates in the early stages of the Republican candidate race for president, what you really saw was that much of elections are about, especially primary elections in which often the distinctions are so slight, about how can you draw a contrast with yourself and your opponent, how can you present yourself as the person who should have the support and not the others. And one of the issues which sort of rose to the forefront for a variety of reasons was, whom had been the tougher person on illegal immigration. And I don't know how closely a lot of you followed this, but I mean, very heated exchanges in the debates among, certainly not Senator McCain as much, but certainly with Governor Romney and Mayor Giuliani, and we had two candidates running, for a significant portion of the race, Tom Tancredo and Duncan Hunter, who were really sort of almost exclusively running as anti-immigration candidates. And so you saw, I think McCain sort of drew a lesson from that for as much victories as he saw in the Senate, sort of being a thoughtful voice on immigration was not a valuable place to be when you're running for president for the Republican nomination. And I think now when you sort of look at McCain's, look at his website, look at the things he's out saying now, I think you can certainly draw the conclusion that he's planning on using immigration only as a defensive issue. Much of what he has on his website, there's not a mention of path to citizenship or things like that, but there's a mention on securing the border and, making better allies with Mexico and Latin America and promoting pro-growth, pro-economic policies. And I think, in looking at where Senator Clinton and Obama were, this was just not an issue either one of them could draw a distinction on each other, so you didn't really see it rise up in the Democratic primaries. Both of them had voted for the McCain-Kennedy bill. I think both of them are, largely in the same place on this issue. We saw a little bit of an issue, a little bit of distinctions that they have tried to draw have not been on the issue of immigration. Both of them sort of highlight their efforts at family reunification. I think Senator Clinton, and I think somewhat illustrative of the problems I think she's had in her campaign and kind of trying to answer everyone, she does take a bit of a confusing turn where she says she's against exploitative guest worker programs that sort of take jobs away from American workers. I think this is often a charge you hear from unions and others who I know she had to try and sort of mend fences with. But then she also sort of in the same pivot says, well, I'm for an ag worker program that helps people come here who are going to work temporarily to do the important work of ag. So I think, what you've largely seen is the reason it hasn't risen up as an issue is all three of them sort of no longer want to draw a distinction among each other because they're in the same place. Senator McCain has seen it as an issue that is not all that valuable for him to appeal to Republican primary voters on. And there just isn't that distinction for Senator Clinton and Obama to draw with each other on it. So that said, be happy to turn it back over.
Do you want to share anything with us on polling data and
how
the public feels about these issues?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Thank you. And Doris had mentioned maybe I should share some stuff on public polling data. Certainly I think one of the reasons I've been invited here today was I've had the good pleasure of doing a lot of immigration polling work for National Immigration Forum and many of their allies, fighting the fight on comprehensive reform. And so I can certainly tell you from firsthand experience, immigration is one of the most difficult issues to poll effectively on, because you have this dynamic of people recognize that illegal immigration is a significant problem, and we know we need to find an effective solution, and are really willing to embrace a variety of solutions. And you certainly have seen this. The more recent polling has been by more organizations that I think, not to be too critical, but ask the questions in sort of inelegant ways. But I think when looking back, LA Times Bloomberg had a poll in December 2007 that showed about 60% support for comprehensive reform. That's about the level I've seen it all other times we've been polling. I think part of the issue you have with it is there's a lot of passion, on the other side. And it may be 60% of the public is for comprehensive reform, but you get, an inordinate amount of the passion is on the other side of that. I think you've seen that in the States and other places with these, we did some work on the Oklahoma anti-immigration legislation this year. For as limited as the support for what it was, when you get into focus groups and talk to people about it, there's an extraordinary level of passion about wanting this as an appropriate solution. But in sort of looking at polling on where is immigration as an issue, we're going to have a battleground poll come out this Thursday. I certainly encourage all of you to go to Tarrance.com. You can download analysis and questionnaires and charts and everything to your heart's content about it. But I think, to sort of give you a sneak peek, one of the key findings is we did ask people, what's the most important issue you think Congress should be working on? We gave them a list of about 10 issues. Immigration was fifth on that list, behind sort of the pocketbook issues like economy, jobs, gas prices, health care, and then behind Iraq. So I think where we used to see it sort of in that upper tier with Iraq and economic concerns, it now has sort of moved into a second-tier issue. Certainly, you're not hearing as heated a rhetoric on it, and for a lot of people, we sort of have to decide what's the most important thing. When you get into an economic situation like we have now, so that base level of how I'm going to pay my jobs, how am I going to pay my bills, how am I going to fill my car with gas, sort of rises up above something like immigration, which certainly is a huge issue, but not something that people, I think many people fret about over their kitchen table day after day when they're paying their bills or making plans with their spouse for the future. And I think one of the other reasons I think you're probably not going to see immigration as an issue going forward in the fall elections is we did ask a question. We asked a series of questions. Whom do you think would be the more appropriate candidate to handle this issue, McCain or Obama, McCain or Clinton? We split the sample. On both those, McCain enjoys a substantial double-digit advantage over both the candidates on immigration reform. So I think, sort of given his reluctance to bring this up as an issue, and as somebody who advises campaigns, you certainly don't want to run a lot of your campaign on an issue that you have a double-digit deficit on. You want to try and look for things that the gap is a little closer, or where you feel like you've got the upper hand. For as many strategic missteps as I think all of the campaigns have made this cycle, I think that's probably not one they're going to make. So, as much as I know everyone here is incredibly passionate about the issue of immigration and immigration reform and finding an appropriate, comprehensive solution to this issue. Really sort of looking into my crystal ball, I think this is not an issue that we'll see a lot of rhetoric about in the presidential campaign. It's just the way the sort of strategic layout looks. I mean, I don't expect Clinton or Obama to raise it, nor do I expect Senator McCain to raise it. So that said, I'd be happy to turn it back over.
Okay. All right. Now, the next we're going to hear from Arturo Vargas. And in order to tee up his comments, let me just say that I think all of us are aware, we always hear the predictions that there is an enormous potential influence in the voting population for immigrant voters and particularly Latino voters. We all know that demographically, statistically, the Latino vote is the single largest new voting bloc that is in play. And yet, the experience has been that that potential tends not to materialize because of less than optimum participation rates. So the question is that changing in this election? And Arturo, can you tell us something about what kinds of mobilization efforts are taking place, both what it is that you're involved in and in general? Arturo Vargas.
Thank you, Doris, and thank you for that question. And I just happen to have a handy-dandy PowerPoint presentation to answer that.
Got to put this up?
Yeah. I hope it's on there. Let's see.
It's hard to see these when we do.
Yeah, what's not on there yet?
Is there somebody know how to dim some lights so that it's more visible? We'll go ahead, but if
well, if it get.
I see. Okay. No, we can't. All right. Go ahead.
No. I don't see it on there yet. Well, while we get the PowerPoint going, let me first say thank you, Doris, for the invitation to be here this morning. And if I start yawning, it's only 7:20 internal clock time. I'm from California, so I apologize for that. A little bit about my organization, NALEO, National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. Think of us as a combination of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the League of Women Voters. We're an organization that represents members. We have a constituency like the good senator who spoke to us this morning, of elected officials ranging from constables and justices of the peace all the way up to U.S. senators. And we have a nonprofit arm that our mission is to promote the participation of Latinos in the American political process, from citizenship, voting, and public service. Let me also recognize one person in the audience, because when I began my career in the nonprofit sector 23 years ago here in Washington, D.C., about a block away at a building that no longer exists on 20 F Street, right next to the Irish Times. I don't know if you all go there, but there used to be a building there that housed a group called the National Council of La Raza. And I started there 23 years ago as an education policy fellow. And one of the people who I always admired as a key advocate on immigration and immigrants' rights was Muzaffar Chisti. And he was part of the nucleus at the time of four of my mentors, Rich Swartz, Wade Henderson, Charles Kamasaki, and Muzaffar, who really were it when it came to immigrant advocates and immigrant rights way back then. And Moose, we're still here. And you still have more hair than I do. Well, let's get on with the presentation on this. And I need my power slides. Somebody went to go get it?
Doris.
What?
You have to push the button.
Oh, all right. What do you know what to do?
I do not know what to do. I can't see anything on the screen.
Does anybody know what to do with a machine like this? I know it's called a computer.
You don't have the screen. What happened to law school curriculum? Yeah, tell me about it. There's nothing on the screen.
Yeah, there's...
This is very good.
You have to look up there. Hit enter. Ah, hola. Okay.
It seems to be up there.
And let me see what. There it is.
All right.
And
Enter, eh?
you think I can do this?
Good job, Andy.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. The Latino vote. Let me talk a little bit about some numbers and some context for you. Most Latinos in the United States actually are born in the United States, native born. Native-born Latino Americans are projected to comprise up to 75% of the Latino population over the next 15 years. This bar actually shows you the breakdown of the foreign-born Latino population. The top segment of that are legal permanent residents. The middle section are naturalized U.S. citizens, and then the bottom red section are the undocumented, which is estimated to be anywhere from 7 to 8 million in terms of the Latino population. The Latino electorate. There are approximately 17 million Latinos who are eligible to vote. Now, this is one of the demographic challenges we have in the Latino community. There are about 45 million Latinos in the United States today, but only 17 million are U.S. citizens of voting age. So there's two things that are working against us when it comes to our voting strength. One is a third of Latinos simply are too young to vote. They're not yet 18. And then about half of Latino adults are not yet citizens. Yet 5.7 million Latino adults are legal permanent residents who are eligible to acquire citizenship, and that's something that we're working on. Nationally, Latinos comprise 9% of all total eligible voters in the country. The Latino vote has been growing in election by election. This shows the rate of increase of actual Latino voters in presidential elections from 1988 to 2004. In 88, there were 3.7 million Latinos who voted. By 2004, there were 7.6 million Latinos who voted. So we've seen a steady progressive increase in the number of Latino voters, as we're seeing in terms of Latinos who are registered to vote. This is the increase, again, of Latinos who are registering in every presidential election. But the next chart really shows what the challenge is. The first two lines at the bottom are the ones I showed earlier, the number of Latino voters and the number of registered voters. The top line is the number of Latinos who are eligible to vote in these elections. And that's the line that's growing the fastest. So as much as I believe that Latinos will elect the next president of the United States, and Latinos have defined this presidential campaign already, and I'll get to some slides where I can demonstrate that. The fact is that we're not keeping pace with the possible growth of the Latino vote, because the number of Latinos who are actually becoming eligible to vote every single day is outpacing the number of Latinos who actually vote. One of those reasons is because every single month, 30,000 Latinos turn 18. Now, one of the things that I'm excited about in terms of this election is that we have a new generation of young Latinos who are coming of voting age in a very politicized awareness environment. Many by divine intervention, I think. One of the reasons that Latino, well, you remember the marches of 2006. Many of those people who took to the streets were high school students. And many of them took to the streets because they were speaking out for the rights of their parents and their family members. Many of them now have turned 18 and are able to vote for the first time, and they're not going to take that vote for granted this year. The early primary schedule has put the Latino vote in play like never before. If you look at the states that held early primary and caucuses, by the time that we got to February 5th, almost 2/3 of all Latino voters in the country had an opportunity to cast the ballot already. And we made a difference in several of these states. This is the breakdown of Latino voters in the primaries and the percentage they made up in the two different primaries. You see they measured much greater in the Democratic primary, especially in states like California, where there are 20% of all voters, but 30% of all Democratic voters, which was really a shock to California when they woke up the next day and saw how many Latinos have voted on February 5th. And the increase has been extraordinary. This is Latino primary performance from one election to the other. Just look at California. In 2004, not even 500,000 Latinos voted in the California primary. But by 2008, there's a 182% increase in the number of Latinos who voted in a primary. Extraordinary awareness, enthusiasm, really commitment to participating in this election. And they have made a difference on both sides of the aisle. This is the Democratic caucuses in Nevada. And what this is showing is what the margin would have been between Clinton and Obama had no Latinos voted. Had no Latinos participated in the caucuses in Nevada, Clinton would have won by 145 votes. But Hispanics participated in Nevada. They participated in droves, and as a result, she won by more than 13,000 votes. And it was the same story in California, the same story in Texas, the same story in New Mexico and Arizona. Had it not been for Hispanic voters, Latino voters in this election, there will only be two presidential candidates today, Obama and McCain. But because Latinos have participated in the Democratic primary, they have defined the Democratic race, as they have defined the Republican race. This shows Romney's at the end here with 556,000 votes compared to McCain, 540,000 votes. This would have been the outcome in the Florida primary had no Hispanics voted in Florida. Romney would have won. And it was the Florida primary that put McCain on the trajectory to win this, to be the presumptive nominee now for the Republican Party. But because Hispanics voted in Florida, instead of losing by 16,000 votes, McCain won by 95,000 votes plus. Latinos have defined the Republican primary race. We've defined the Democratic race, and we defined the Republican race. And we intend to define this race in November as well. Make no mistake about it, Latinos will elect the next president of the United States. I actually believe my own press release on this one. This shows the margin of difference in some of the key states in 2004. The margin of victory is in blue, and then the share of the vote in those states, which is Latino, is in red. So Colorado, 5% difference in 2004 between Kerry and Bush. Latinos are 8% of the voters in that state. Latinos could define the statewide outcome in Colorado, as well as New Mexico, Nevada, Wisconsin, Florida, and a number of other states. Okay, one of the things that we're working on is to make sure Latinos turn out and Latinos vote. And one of the challenges, as I mentioned, has been the lack of citizenship among legal permanent residents. So in January of 2007, we launched a campaign called Ya es hora ciudadanía. It's time citizenship. And it was a campaign to inform, educate, motivate eligible legal permanent residents in the U.S. to apply for U.S. citizenship, right? Apple pie, who could be opposed to people becoming citizens? And what we did was work with Spanish language media, worked with an army of grassroots organizations, attorneys, churches, school districts, to produce an incredible mobilization of the community. Now, when I say saturation of the media, this was unprecedented in Spanish language broadcast history and print as well. Media, television, radio, and print. Our partner in this was Univision Communications, which is the most watched Spanish language television network in the country. It reaches about almost 100% of all Spanish-speaking households, and I'm not sure exactly how many Latino households in general, but you can't watch, you can't go into a home that has not seen Univision. Univision took ownership of the campaign Ya es hora ciudadanía in a way that this was not a PSA campaign. This is not something that showed up, at 2 a.m. in the morning, by the way, become a citizen. This was a campaign that we worked with Univision where they owned it and they produced programming in their Sunday morning talk shows, their morning talk shows every single day, Monday through Friday. On the locals newscast, there would be an interview with somebody who was applying to be a citizen. They would cut away to a citizenship workshop being held in the community that day. They held 3 30-minute television shows that they produced. One was a 30-minute show, uninterrupted, no commercials, on how to prepare to become a U.S. citizen. The second 30-minute show was how to fill out the N-400 form, which is a foreign naturalization form. And the third 30-minute show was how to actually prepare for the interview. And working with the USCIS locally in Los Angeles, they actually taped an actual interview of somebody going through the process of completing the test to be a U.S. citizen. This was coordinated with radio, the same radio that mobilized people to take to the streets in 2006, and with print, with the newspaper company called Impremedia, which owns a number of newspapers around the country, including La Opinión. To give you a sense of how this was coordinated, Univision, one week, sent out the message, make sure you buy your newspaper on Thursday. Because on Thursday, La Opinión printed the N-400 application, full-page ad, for free, as a contribution, printed the N-400 form. And then the message was, buy your newspaper on Thursday, because on Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m., we're all going to fill out our N-400 together. And we're going to go through it question by question. And if you have any questions, call 1-888-VEI-VOTA, which is a toll-free hotline that gets answered in our offices in Los Angeles. We were staffed with bilingual operators. And if somebody said, I have a question, I have a DUI, or, I went out of the country so many times, what do I do? We were staffed up to refer people to their local communities, to service organizations or attorneys who could help them. So it's that kind of mobilization where we had millions of people watching television one morning, filling out the N-400 application together. And if you had a question, call the phone, you get answered in English or Spanish, and you get referred to somebody that same day to help you fill out the application. So it was like, if you have a problem, stop, don't fill out this application, go talk to an attorney. But if you don't have a problem, now you've filled it out, and now you can actually go get the actual application and get through the process. So we had 23 cities participating in 13 states, 400 centros de ciudadanía, citizenship centers. These were actual organizations that served as referral centers. We had a hotline operation, as I mentioned, 40,000 calls plus. We have a website up where people can actually go to the website and find out the process to become a citizen, how to fill out the form, and we have more than 200 workshops. Our goal was to get 1 million people motivated to become citizens. We hit this goal by October 2007. And we created a backlog. This is an embarrassment to the USCIS. We actually met with the USCIS here in D.C. way back in 2006 saying, we're going to do this campaign. We're warning you. And you're going to raise the fee, which they did in July of 2007. It went from $400 some dollars to $695. And every time there's been a fee increase, there's been a spike in applications. So we knew there was going to be a surge because of the fee increase. And we knew because of the anti-immigrant sentiment that people were being motivated and interested in becoming citizens. So we warned the USCIS, prepare yourselves. And they did not. So we ended up with a naturalization backlog. Ultimately, in 2007, 1.4 million people applied for U.S. citizenship. So we have naturalization backlogs in a number of offices. These are the top 30 processing waiting times, 14 months plus. Actually, the longest wait is here in D.C. And the biggest number of applications pending continue to be in Los Angeles and Miami and New York. I don't know if you can read these numbers, but people have turned out, and the application surge hasn't ended. People are continuing to apply for naturalization. And one of the things we know about naturalized voters is that they vote. This is the difference between Latinos, naturalized citizens, and Latino native-born citizens. The blue is the turnout rate of those who are registered to vote in the past 4 presidential elections. Consistently, naturalized U.S. citizens outperform native-born citizens. So the real challenge is getting those who are born here to actually go out and vote, because the ones who are naturalized actually do vote. And, you know, my mom is a poster child for this. She migrated here in 1952. It wasn't until 1994 that she applied to be a U.S. citizen. She actually went to a NALEO workshop, this is before I worked at NALEO, and applied to be a citizen on her own. And have you ever been to a swearing-in ceremony?
Yes.
They're one of the most inspiring events you can ever attend. And it was something special. Obviously, see my 59-year-old mother at the time waving her little American flag and being sworn in to be a U.S. citizen. And then I asked her, this was all in Spanish, Mom, what finally motivated you to become a U.S. citizen after being in the United States in 1952? And she said, because I want to vote against Pete Wilson. And the next year, she voted to legalize medical marijuana. But it was that motivation to vote in '94 that motivated 1 million legal permanent residents in California to naturalize during the 1990s and fundamentally changed the nature of the Latino electorate in California, which Senator Vandy referred to earlier. Prop 187 and then the welfare reform measures here at the federal level helped change the nature of the electorate in California, and we're doing that, and we're continuing to do that at a national level. So we're transitioning our campaign from Yes Hora Ciudadanía to Yes Hora Ve y Vota, the same kind of saturation of the media that we used to motivate people to become U.S. citizens, we're going to use to motivate people to register to vote and then to vote come in November. We had national partners in our campaign on the citizenship side, National Council La Raza, SEIU, and of course Spanish language media, Univision, Entravision, and Inframedia. Now for the voting phase, our national partners continue to be Spanish language media and NCLR and Mi Familia Vota, which is the nonprofit arm of the SEIU. We have a hotline. We're going to provide voter protection. We have a national partnership now with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, so that on Election Day, people can call our same toll-free hotline that they called to ask for about UN citizenship. They can call on Election Day if there's any problem with people going to the polls and being turned away. One of the things we know about elections in this country is that they're not well administered. Most people, in my opinion, are disenfranchised, not out of malice necessarily, but out of incompetency in running elections. And it's one of the things that we're trying to do is educate voters, because the best way to protect the voters' rights is to make sure that the voter is educated and informed about his or her rights. That if they show up at the polling location, what are they required to show or not show in a particular state in terms of ID, and if their names are not on the roster, that they have a right to vote with a provisional ballot. Many poll workers don't even know that that's something they need to be providing. So we'll be doing get out the vote efforts throughout the country. Targeting Latino voters, we're going to be doing some mapping. We have software. It's going to be a whole online effort in terms of targeting Latino registered voters who don't vote. We're going to do the same kind of partnerships with these centers across the country. Again, mass mobilization of media, local organizations to get the vote out in November. If anybody is interested in participating or working with us, please feel free to give me a call. Check out our webpage. Because, as I said, Latinos will elect the next president of the United States. And I actually believe that. Thank you.
Okay, you'll have your opportunity at the end of this session to ask questions of Arturo, and thanks very much for all that good information. Okay, the third part of this discussion of immigration and the elections has to do with immigrant advocacy. We all know that with the failure of immigration reform last spring, immigration advocacy suffered a bitter defeat. Frank Sharry has been a part of that, has been at the center of it for a very, very long time. And so no one better qualified to talk about it and to talk about what it's meant for the future. So the questions that I've asked Frank to answer in his part of the program are to describe to us what kind of rethinking and realignments are taking place in the aftermath of that experience, to try to speculate a bit on what role those efforts might be playing in the election, and finally, and possibly most important, what are the expectations that advocates have for a new administration, a new Congress, post-election? Frank?
Thank you, Doris. So a lot to handle in a few minutes, but I'll try. So I guess you should all take whatever I say with a grain of salt, since I think I was here last year predicting that some version of comprehensive reform would pass. And we all know that in spectacular fashion that prediction crashed and burned. So, and in fact, I think it's a cautionary tale. I hear a lot of people say, gee whiz, 3 presidential candidates, all of whom supported immigration reform. Doesn't that mean that sometime in 2009, Humpty Dumpty is going to be put back together and immigration reform will pass? I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think what we need to learn from what happened in the past year and what's happening now is going to make immigration reform a more challenging boulder to push up the mountain. And let me explain why. I think what happened in the spring of and summer of last year was a couple of remarkable developments. I mean, first of all, you had a Republican Party who used to keep its anti-immigrant wing at bay fully embrace its anti-immigrant wing in a way that was unprecedented. I mean, remember, the anti-immigrant groups took over the Reform Party in 2000 to run Pat Buchanan because they saw no home for themselves in the Republican Party. And even Tancredo's Immigration Reform Caucus numbered about 70, 80 people when the House was a Republican majority. So a minority within the Republican Party that was kept at bay with a pro-immigration president like George Bush, and the only question was, when is he going to actually go forward on some version of comprehensive immigration reform? Well, I think last year what we saw is that a despondent Republican Party saw all that energy coming from the grassroots anti-immigrant groups, all of that talk radio and talk TV energy, and said, that's our base. That is a welcome part of the new base. And I think that's going to play out in this election, and it's going to make it that much more challenging to get the kind of votes in Congress from Republicans that are going to be needed to ultimately pass immigration reform. I think another thing that happened was that advocates such as myself, who thought that we could hold most Democrats and most progressives as we reached across to get business and Bush and Republican support, have also learned a few lessons, which is that the fact that the anti-immigrant forces were so dominant within the Republican Party that the business community was unable to produce votes, and that a White House strategy that was promising 25 to 30 of the 60 votes needed in the Senate, and it ultimately produced 12, that maybe the Republican Party and pro-reform allies are not in a position to really deliver. Meanwhile, progressive forces and Democrats were divided in a way that sapped enthusiasm and energy for reform. So folks like me are questioning, well, wait a minute, maybe instead of reaching across to the right, we should consolidate support among progressive forces and come to a table with strength, however much time it takes for the business community and the anti-immigrant forces to work out the correlation of forces within the Republican Party. That's a very different strategy than trying to reconstruct a bipartisan top-down approach to comprehensive immigration reform as we've seen in the past. I think also what we learned in the last round is that the anti-immigrant forces, while a minority, an ascendant minority still within the Republican Party, had such intensity that they intimidated Republicans that there wasn't a corresponding force on the other side. Advocates were divided, progressive forces divided, immigrant communities seemingly on the sidelines for the most part in the debate. Of course, it was a 6-week debate, so there wasn't a whole lot of time, but nevertheless, the rallies in 2006 compared to the immigrant community response in 2007 was dramatically different. So that's why the efforts that Arturo and others are engaged in the voter mobilization efforts, are going to be so critical to determining the future of policy reform. If there's a huge turnout of Latino, particularly what the pollsters rightly call Spanish-dominant households, Spanish-dominant voters, if there's a huge turnout and immigration reform is a defining issue for that electorate, that'll send a very powerful message, because what politicians are going to look at coming out of this election are a couple of things. One, is there that turnout? Is there what we might end up calling el voto castigo, the punishment vote against a Republican Party that has embraced the anti-immigrant cause? Number two, what about the anti-immigrant voters? They certainly can make a lot of noise, but can they produce a lot of votes? Again, a cautionary tale for Republicans would be the Florida primary, where John McCain, the person most vilified by the anti-immigrant right, won in Florida because he won the Latino vote, squeaked out a victory against Romney and turned it around. A remarkable development that John McCain is the nominee when the anti-immigrant forces are ascendant within the Republican Party. So where is the Republican Party going to be after an election? If they've suffered a devastating debate, Latinos have turned out in record numbers to vote against them, the party has to rebrand and rethink what it stands for. I could imagine that the courtship of the anti-immigrant forces that the Republican Party seems engaged in now, at least most Republicans, might end up being a divorce. But we'll see. And then, of course, what everybody's focused on are the so-called swing voters in swing districts. And the question is going to be, while at the presidential level, immigration is going to have a different character, and I'll talk about that in a second, what most of us are going to be watching is what happens down ballot. Because clearly immigration is going to be used by most Republican candidates in races from Senate to dog catcher at all levels. And it's going to be unprecedented. So immigration, in the theory that many Republican candidates and consultants have, is a great way to mobilize the Republican base. Look at all that energy generated in the last Senate debate. But also, it might be a way to win culturally conservative Reagan Democrats who switched to Democrats in 2006, and maybe we can pull them back by defining Democrats as soft on illegal immigration, and Republicans really are going to solve the problem with a tough enforcement approach, law enforcement approach. That is going to be tried. Now, it's been tried in 05, 06, and 07 in a variety of races and hasn't worked. For the most part, will it work in 08? That will be, I think, a big defining political event or analysis that will determine whether there's more political space for reform. Let me say that from a strategic point of view, advocates that I'm talking with on a regular basis, I think we're trying to figure out how can we not hope for the next president. Well, let me say something, I'm sorry, about McCain and Obama and Clinton, because I think there's going to be a subplot. It's true that they're probably not going to use the issue in English very much unless asked, but in Spanish, this is going to be a huge debate. Arturo mentioned these swing states, Florida, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, where there's growing numbers of Latino voters, and much of that growth is, New Mexico exception, because of Latino immigrant or Spanish-dominant families. Is immigration reform going to be such a defining issue that Obama, who isn't well known, if he's the nominee, and McCain, who has a brand but is being kept by the anti-immigrant forces from using his advantage on immigration reform, that subplot is going to be hugely important. So if Arturo's right, and I think he is, that Latinos will elect the next president, these swing states for whom Spanish-dominant families, immigration reform is a big issue, how those two candidates perform is going to be a big deal. Have you watched John McCain recently? He's changed his message on immigration reform 5 times in the past month. He's struggling to figure out how much space do I have, given the right-wing embrace of the anti-immigrant cause, when I know I have to compete with presumably Obama in these swing states for folks I might be able to get. So don't miss that aspect of this debate. It'll be perhaps under the radar for most of the pundits in America, but I know a lot of us will be watching the ad wars and the debates in those states very intensely because it's going to be hugely important. Finally, let me just say that I actually think that whoever's president is going to matter less than whether members of Congress and constituencies they listen to are ready to do reform. That's why when I think about what are the prospects for reform, I'm going to be interested in seeing whether senators such as the talented senator from Texas and governors and other mayors and others are going to actually start to participate in the federal debate demanding action. When state and local officials become better organized and say we need action now, that'll be a key sign that reform is coming. When businesses are able to stand up to anti-immigrant forces in their party and get off the defense and say we need reform in some form or fashion, that'll be important. When labor says these raids and these the kinds of enforcement-only measures are creating worse conditions for both immigrant and native-born workers and become more energized, a development that I see developing in rapid speed, I think that's going to be hugely important. And then I think the faith communities, which have always been in the lead on this, as they continue to express the moral outrage at the idea that the official position of many policymakers right now is, let's make life so miserable that Latino immigrants, legal and otherwise, get driven out of our community and out of our country. Because that is what attrition through enforcement is about. It's mass deportation with a smiley face slapped on top. And the faith community is going to call it out in a way that only they can, and I think that's going to be another sign that reform is coming around the corner. So, from my point of view, we've got a long way to go in that Democrats have to get on offense, not defense. Republicans have to realize that this wedge issue has backfired and that the nation's going to get tired of a divisive debate without a solution. And what I think ultimately most Americans want is a practical solution. But I'm afraid, and I wish it was some other way, that things are likely going to have to get worse before they get better, and there's going to have to be a sufficient amount of moral outrage to make American policymakers do what they know they need to do. Thanks.
Okay, we have 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. All kinds of things have been put out on the table. So I hope you have questions, and I hope you use this as an opportunity to learn more from this very qualified group of people that's at the table. Let's see here. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Roman Ginsberg from University of Denver Law School. Brief question. We hear a lot about recession and that we are in a recession. What do you think are the prospects of pro-immigrant reform in a recession, specifically its effect on the Latino vote, who's going to elect the next president? Thanks.
Frank, go ahead.
Well, yeah, gosh. It's not good. But I don't know. I think the main effect is going to be that if the Democrats win the White House and expand their majority, that you're likely going to have pocketbook issues dominate the early agenda and not immigration reform. I think that's going to be the main impact. So health care reform and energy reform are likely going to take precedence. And so I'm not sure what the impact will be on the electorate.
Yeah. Well, we just held a series of national town halls. We're going to be releasing the results of that at our national conference, which will be held here in D.C. June 25th through the 28th at the Renaissance Hotel. So that's a plug for the NALEO conference. But one of the things that we are learning, this was a town halls of Latino registered voters, high propensity voters, and the economy was the number one issue for them, and these kind of pocketbook issues. So even among Latino voters, and interestingly, the number two issue that emerged around the country was the war in Iraq, which doesn't seem to be as high on the list of priorities as among non-Latinos as it is among Latinos. So I think those two issues are really going to be driving people. But not that Latino voters don't care about immigration. The way it really affects is the tenor that campaigns take. And if the tenor of these, especially non-ballot races, are such that it's clear to Latino voters that they're being targeted, that's just going to serve to motivate people to turn out.
I would just say, I mean, rarely is there any sort of positive impact from a recession from any policy standpoint. But I think to some extent, you know, what you'll see this year that we don't have an, don't have an appropriate ags bill. We don't have enough guest workers coming in. That, on top of everything, you're potentially going to see higher food prices. Less food to be able to be delivered. That maybe that is one more sort of little lever to push the business community towards saying, we got to have immigration reform. I wasn't able to even harvest all my crops, and to sort of get people thinking that way. That hey, I never meant for have to pay more for groceries to sort of fuel this sentiment. So I think, Frank and Arturo are right. I mean, the most likely outcome is sort of pushing the issue down. But I think, underneath that, there is some extent that we could see sort of some of the business community and leaders say, enough is enough. I need workers to do the important work for my businesses.
Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Doris. Andy Schoenholz from Georgetown Law. Brian, I had a question for you. In any of the polling that you've done, did you try to unpack the anti-immigrant sentiment, et cetera? Did you try to find out underneath what's driving it, to what degree, et cetera?
But before you go ahead, let me do a logistics thing here. It's hard to get to these mics, and so I'm going to ask Gretchen and Yuri, would you pick the mics up? And those of you who are in the middle that may want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you so that it's more possible. Excuse me, Brian, go ahead.
Please. Excellent question. I mean, part of what we found was, there was a lot of passion behind it, and in doing, I think it came out better when we did focus groups with these people. That what was really remarkable is they would be sort of upset, seeing more Spanish language speakers in their community, and interactions where they they go to McDonald's and the person doesn't speak very good English, and these sort of detriments of day-to-day life where you feel like your way of life is slipping away. But what was really shocking, in group after group, I mean, even places, we were in, North Texas and places where the immigration is a real hot issue. We would have in people that maybe weren't the most fervent anti-immigration people, but the sentiment would be there. And I mean, like you wouldn't believe. I mean, people who would, use the word wetback, and in normal conversation we would talk about things. After you sort of walk them through comprehensive reform and got them, sort of thinking about it, this is an appropriate solution, like a sea change. I mean, like nothing I've ever seen in doing these groups on all kinds of issues. I mean, just a sea change in the room where you'd see people sort of take a deep breath and say, well, that sounds all right, and, it is pretty burdensome to become a citizen. And so, I would think there was certainly Frank and I both had this struggle that you knew if comprehensive reform could just kind of germinate in people's minds for a little while, they would realize that this was a reasonable solution. But I think we just, given the way public discourse sometimes works in Washington, we just weren't able to get there.
Okay, hands.
I got a mic and more than a hand. I'm Muzaffar Chishti, Migration Policy Institute. Actually, since Frank and Arturo both said that Latinos will elect the next president of the United States, and assuming that's true, so let's cut to the chase. If they have the choice then between McCain and either Senator Clinton or Senator Obama, how do you think they will vote, and why?
Okay, I'll start with this one, but I'll certainly want to hear
go
both
ahead,
your
Brian,
expertise. Actually, I'm pleased both of them brought this up, because one of the things I was doing, when you look at exit polls from Bush in 2004 and exit polls aggregate for Republican congressional candidates in 2006, the single biggest demographic group that we had a drop-off with, was a 14-point drop-off, was Hispanics. And I don't think there's any secret to why that was. I mean, Bush was Bush ran Spanish language media and was someone who really embraced the Hispanic community, and certainly many of our candidates in 2006 didn't. And so I think there certainly will be one of the most important voting blocks in the 2008 elections. And I think, Frank laid it out nicely, that there'll be an interesting problem for them in that, McCain and Obama are in large extent on the same page. They both voted for McCain Kennedy. They both lead off. If you go to both their websites, they both lead off with, "I want to secure the border." I want to make allies with our southern neighbors. I want to have pro-growth immigration policies. Have pro-immigration policies that promote economic growth. So it really will come down to this sort of fine difference of whether or not either one of them is able to sort of make the courageous leap to come out and say I'm for a path to citizenship and I'm for other things, or if they'll both sort of be content to be in that box. And certainly I would say at this stage I don't know that I would. If I was advising Obama, that I would tell him that this was a real good issue that you want to fight McCain to a draw on. And I think, if I was advising McCain, I'd tell him the same thing, that I don't know this is an issue, given the problems it causes for either party, that you want to fight Obama on in a protracted way. So I think, yes, I mean, Hispanics will be certainly one of the most important groups, but, specifically on the issue of immigration, I don't know how effectively the candidates are going to be willing and able to sort of draw the distinction on that issue.
Arturo, how would you answer that question?
Well, I think there will be a significant difference if it's Clinton versus McCain than if it's Obama versus McCain with regard to the Latino vote. Latinos have been incredibly enthusiastic and supportive of Clinton's candidacy, and that's why she's still in the race today, is because she's carried the Latino vote. So assuming that Obama becomes the presumptive nominee and is nominated by the Democrats, he's going to have to do a lot of work to reach out to Latino voters that his campaign, frankly, has not yet done. It wasn't until the Texas primary that there was any significant outreach to Latino leadership. He actually got a fair number of state legislators in Texas to endorse his candidacy, including my board chairman and the chairman of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus. But leadership endorsements did not translate into grassroots votes for Obama. So assuming that it's an Obama candidacy, I think we'll also need to see Senator Clinton campaign for him and campaign among Latinos to say it's okay to vote for Obama because he's the candidate that will see through what I have been seeing through, assuming this is Clinton speaking. So I think it's a real unknown. And I think McCain can get a lot of traction with Latinos, just like a more sympathetic Bush did back in 2000, 2004.
Arturo, before we go to Frank, let me ask you about a point that Frank made in his remarks, the subplot here. And as I understood that, is the suggestion that you can run a kind of a under-the-radar campaign possibly in Spanish language, but certainly for those voters that doesn't percolate up into the mainstream campaign. Is that realistic today in this media world that we live in, and how sophisticated would Latino voters be in reaction to something like that?
I think actually Latino voters are very sophisticated. They've shown that they'll cross party lines. They'll vote for the candidate whom they believe is on their side. And if you saw the strategy in 2004, George Bush actually outspent John Kerry in Spanish language media in Florida. And that's one of the reasons why he carried that state in 2004. So I do think that there's going to be a war, an ads war in Spanish language television, much to the delight of Univision and Telemundo, I'm sure. But I think if it doesn't happen, it happens at their peril of these candidates.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Frank?
Well, I won't repeat what's been said about Obama, but I do think that I think what McCain's going to do is going to be fascinating because, you know, McCain's got a brand, but the R next to his name is also a brand. And among Spanish-dominant Latino voters, McCain's brand is a whole lot better than the R next to his name. And it's going to be interesting to see whether, I mean, I'm going to look, I mean, he's going to show up at some of these conferences that Arturo's going to have and at NCLR, I suspect, as will Obama. And they're not going to be able to not address immigration. And so when John McCain goes to the National Council of La Raza conference in San Diego in July, is he going to stand up and say border security first? Or is he going to think, I have enough political space, given how I need to run away from the Republican Party, given how disastrous the election looks for Republicans, to say, you know what, I've been a comprehensive reformer, I'm going to remain a comprehensive reformer? Or is he going to try to thread the needle? I don't know what he's going to do, but I suspect it's going to be very dynamic. So I do think that immigration as an electoral issue has yet to fully play out, even if it's a subplot. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the millions of dollars that Republican candidates are going to be spending in local races saying, get rid of the immigrants, how that's going to affect the race. So we're going to have new dynamics that I think that we're going to have to really analyze how this is working. How is it working with anti-immigrant voters, swing voters, and Spanish-dominant Latino voters? And I think that the jury is still out on all three.
Question up in the back.
Thank you. My name is Katie Simpson, and I'm a recent graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law, and I work for the Maryland Immigrant Rights Coalition. The Economist on January 5th had a special report about how immigrants are a tremendous source of prosperity, both for the sending country and for the host country. and this report explained how immigrants are a consumer base, how their remittances help to keep inflation low within the United States, and how the jobs that they are taking are freeing up other economic actors in the United States to take jobs outside of the home that they otherwise would not have. Additionally, even as early as 2001, the IRS was reporting that immigrants reported income of $7 billion and paid taxes on that income. So how do you think that immigrant advocacy groups could use this economic information to help to push immigration reform?
Well, I think, Frank, that's a question for you.
Yep.
Well, all the facts you cite are, I think, generally held to be true by serious researchers and are generally held to be untrue by voters. So we have as advocates, we have a bit of a challenge. Do you win the factual battle, or is there a shorter cut to reform that is more humane and progressive? I suggest that if we put all of our energy into winning the factual battle, that's more like the 30-year plan. And that if we have to look at other strategies to have more like a 3 to 5 year plan. And I would suggest that those strategies have more to do with building electoral power in your state and in the community. That has to do with being much more aggressive and assertive in the media to challenge the distorted facts that are regularly spewed out by particularly talk radio and talk TV. And that we also need to, I think, challenge ourselves as advocates to be unequivocally for the rule of law through intelligent reform, rather than seemingly being defined by our opponents as not so concerned with the rule of law. If it does so, and I don't think that's a real challenge for us, because all of our policy positions are about restoring the rule of law in a way that would actually be practical. But I think that we've often let ourselves be defined as sort of more interested in the plight of immigrants than in the taxpayers and workers who are concerned that maybe this isn't good for them. So those would be, to me, power, a much more aggressive approach in the media, and then positioning ourselves as much more in favor of not only immigrants, but for American workers and American taxpayers and the rule of law. That would be where I would go with respect to developing a strategy that could be a shorter cut to victory.
Now, I have to say, without so saying, I think Frank has laid out for you the mission or approach of a new organization called America's Voice. Am I correct about that, Frank?
Some of this thinking's about that. Yeah, sure.
Would you like to do a little additional commercial?
Well, would you like to tell us a little bit? We're just starting a new organization. It's called America's Voice, and it's going to be hopefully something of a communications war room for the campaign for immigration reform. And so we'll hopefully be up and running soon. We've opened our doors, but we're staffing up. And the idea is to not simply talk about what's good facts and what's good policy, but also to engage in this in more of a campaign-style approach, because, let's be honest, this is a political and electoral battle, and we've been fighting it as if it's a policy battle, and I think we need to develop some new tools and new muscles in order to be more effective, and America's Voice is going to try to contribute in what small way we can to do that.
Okay, we have time for a last question. Okay, over here, Christina.
Thank you. I'm Christina Rodriguez from the NYU Law School. I want to return to the question that Moose asked. This is directed primarily at Arturo, but I'm sure others might have insights. And among the claims that you've heard made a lot during the campaign about why Latinos have gone so overwhelmingly in favor of Senator Clinton as opposed to Senator Obama is because of the issue of race, and that Latinos are not willing as a group to vote for a black candidate. And I would like to know whether you've addressed that as an organization, because it's a trope that I've found to be a distressing one, whether it's true or not, to have been present in the debate. And if you think there is some truth to it, what would you do as an organization to try to address the underlying reasons for why that might be within the Latino community in particular?
Well, I think the data bear out that it's absolutely untrue to suggest that Latinos will now vote for an African-American candidate. You look at races where there have been Latino electorates and Latino candidates: Tom Bradley in Los Angeles, Wellington Webb in Denver, Harold Washington in Chicago, David Dinkins in New York, what's his name, Ron Kirk in Dallas, all African-American mayors, all who have won their city races with Latino support. I think the problem that Obama has had is that he hasn't had an aggressive Latino outreach strategy as Clinton had. I mean, she went out and got the endorsements early on from Mayor Villaraigosa, Speaker of the Assembly, Fabian Nunez in California, on down the line, the majority of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. She has a brand that is very popular among Latino voters. Bill Clinton was one of the most beloved presidents among Latinos, probably not since Kennedy, and that has worn off on her. Obama is seen, I think, as an unknown young person, largely from Illinois, and it's not known to the rest of the country and the rest of the Latino voters, which is why his challenge, if he gets the nomination, is to really introduce himself to Latinos nationwide. He's going to have to use all the Latino surrogates to advocate for him, and I think he's going to have Clinton campaign for him among Latino communities in order to turn out the vote.
Okay, well, I think we all know a good deal more now than we did before this session started about what's really at stake and how immigration plays into the 2008 elections. We're going to break and come back at 11:30, but as we do that, please join me in thanking our panel.
Oh,